Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Dave, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, man. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
I'm Dave Luhrssen. I am the managing editor of a daily podcast, or website rather, and monthly magazine in Milwaukee called The Shepherd Express. I'm also the author of a number of books, most of them dealing with cultural and intellectual history, which is what I studied in college. These books include essays on music, film, and even the things that don't obviously relate to music and film have to do with culture in some ways, like secret societies, the influence that secret societies have had on culture and the influence culture has had on them.
Now, when you mentioned secret society's influence on culture, could you give me some examples of some influence? And also, how'd you get started in even going from film to looking into secret societies? It's not film representation of them, is it?
No, although there have been some films dealing with secret societies, Skull and Bones, I think, was one about the Skull and Bones Society at Yale University. There was kind of a crummy movie loosely based on legends about that particular group. A very good example of a cultural influence, Harry Smith. I don't know if you know the name. Harry Smith was very instrumental in launching the folk music revival of the 1950s and 60s. He put together a box set of albums called The History of American Folk Music, or the American Folk Music Anthology. He was deeply into the occult. He was affiliated with Aleister Crowley, one of those organizations, and he based his curation of American folk music, picking obscure recordings from the past and putting them together in a set like this, and all kinds of alchemical calculations and so on. Another member of that same group called OTO, Jack Parsons, was very instrumental in the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and the early experiments in America with rocketry. So there you have two guys into something that conventional science would dismiss as being wrong, one of whom had a great influence on the development of technology through Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and the other person, not looked upon by the cultural academies of that time with great favor, had a great influence on the development of American music. So no Harry Smith, no Bob Dylan, no Joan Baez, and so on.
When I knew about the musicians, kind of, I've heard some like they had talk about burying something at a crossroads and something of that sort with some musicians, and obviously that's like folklore. Whether people actually went into, I know they talk about if you play an album backwards or a vinyl record backwards, you could hear like the devil speak. I never really bought into any of that. I've tried it before, like trying to replay a record backward and see if you could hear something. I never heard anything. I mean, if you're on drugs, you probably heard something. But there's a lot of like obviously exaggeration that gets brought on with secret societies, but there are real secret societies out there. Like I think even one of your books talks about the Thule Society, but there's like even more modern day ones, like things like Bohemian Grove and stuff of this sort. Skull and Bones is like an old one that I've heard of, like a college fraternity. I don't know how deep it goes, but it's like, I mean, do you ever know unless you're in? Freemasons I consider a cult because every firefighter is a part of it and they all seem to wear rings about it.
Well, the thing that I'm very cautious about, and the thing that many other writers are not very cautious about, frankly, there's a lot of garbage stuff on some of the history channels, secrets of the Nazi occult world and stuff like this, which is put together by people who are not very good at sifting fact from fiction. I mean, what I'm trying to do with some of the books that I've written about the Thule Society, about American secret societies, is to look at strong probabilities, because a secret society by its very nature They're not publicizing themselves. They're not transparent. They're not leaving behind always an exact paper trail. Well, some of them do end up leaving a paper trail behind. There's a lot of room for speculation, and I don't like to make ridiculous claims for any of these groups, but I do make the claim that secret societies, however you want to define them, have had an influence on the development of human history. They had an influence on the development of the United States because most of the founders of our country were Freemasons. And pull out a dollar bill from your wallet, look at the back of it, the eye at the top of the pyramid, the Ordo Novus Ordo. I mean, it's all Masonic symbolism. When the foundation stone for the U.S. Capitol was laid, there was a Masonic ceremony taking place around that. Most of the generals of the Continental Army, the early Supreme Court justices, George Washington himself, I mean, Benjamin Franklin, I mean, all these people belong to that. What does it mean? It was a way of networking, for one thing, just like the fire department people you mentioned before. It's a way of getting together. And in many cases in the US, Masonic lodges were centers of political influence, even going into the 20th century. So the judge, the police chief, the alderman, the this, the that, they all got together and talked shop at the lodge and kind of looked after each other as a lodge brother. Is there something really dark and sinister, a plot to control the world through all of this? No, I don't think so. But I think that on a local level, Masonic groups have had a great deal of impact on, directing the course of politics. And in the case of the US, actually kind of founding the nation on their principles.
So you actually believe that they have an influence in there?
They did. I mean, I don't think that they have much of an influence anymore. I think that the lodges have declined in membership. I think that younger generations lost interest in it. And those Masons that I have known personally, they're all older people and they all complain the kids don't care about this stuff anymore. We're all going to. So anyway, it's that kind of thing. I mean, I think that they have been in decline. But in terms of membership in the US, they probably reached a peak during the World War II era. So Harry Truman was a Mason, the Grand Master of the Lodge of Missouri. Again, you go through the list of politicians and important people in America.
George Bush.
Yeah. And an inordinate number of them were Masons. And again, here's where I stop short of what some people try to make of this.
Get to the spellcraft. I'm kidding.
Right. Well, this idea is a council of 12 evil men who are Masons sitting somewhere in a castle or wherever they would be, and they're kind of dictating the outcome of world events. No. One way of disproving this.
Did you see the new Netflix show with Mike Myers called The Pentaveret? You would love it.
No, I have not seen it.
It's like the Illuminati. It's a bunch of guys sitting at a table orchestra, but they do it in obviously Mike Myers comedy, but it's great. I mean, it really I'm not a big conspiracy in the whole secret society things. I've actually had a Freemason lodge leader on the show before, and he talks about it's a really just great way to hang out with friends and it's more modern. Yeah,
it is. And one way of disproving the idea of the international Masonic conspiracy, the famous Battle of the Alamo. The Mexican General Santa Anna was a Mason, but so was Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie on the other side. I mean, during the American Revolution, some of the British officers here in this country were Masons. And again, as I said, most of the American patriots and founders were. So they were battling with each other. What does this mean? It means they're not one coherent international organization. It's a bunch of people in different locations with a set of ceremonies that bring them together. They sit down, they have meetings, they talk about local issues, they have a beer together, whatever they do. And they have had influence, but they're not the controlling kind of conspiratorial thing that some people want to make them out to be. And that's the same thing with a lot of this stuff. The Thule Society has been greatly exaggerated in kind of comic book form as being the controlling aspect of the Third Reich. In reality, they had a very important role in launching the Nazi Party and shaping the mindset of Hitler, but they did not control Nazi Germany at all. In fact, they were banned by Hitler. Uh, they're the leading character, very fascinating man, Baron von Sabatendorf, was forced to flee the country. And so, yeah, they were important, but they were not dominant. They were not in charge.
Now, when you mentioned an influence on Hitler, what kind of influence did they have?
Well,
There's theories about Hitler being on amphetamines when he gives some of those speeches. I don't know if you've ever heard something like that before, but if you watch it thinking that, I'm like, I can't tell if the guy's angry or if he's going through some withdrawal on cocaine or something.
well, withdrawal on cocaine, perhaps. I mean, there was actually a good documentary a few years ago about drug use in Germany. In fact, there was drug use among American pilots flying the bombing missions where they were given amphetamines to keep them alert, during the bombing runs. I think there were other cases of this being done on the U.S. side. There was a
Vietnam War.
lot of this kind of drug use going on among allies and Axis both. And somebody dug up some prescription records basically for Hitler, and yes, he was definitely juiced up on a lot of different things. But does that explain his ideas? No, not at all. The Thule Society, among other things, they formed an organization which became the National Socialist German Workers, or Nazi Party. They did this as a way of building a bridge between their very esoteric beliefs and the working class. They had a belief system that involved, you could call it neo-paganism and occult practices. They wanted to invoke the ancient Nordic deities of Thor, Odin, and so forth. And their plan was that the Northern European peoples, who they regarded as the master race of the world, that they needed to dominate. They needed to take control of Germany. And obviously, an occult group invoking Thor and Odin would not be taken seriously by the vast majority of people in that country. And so they wanted to find a front group to sort of, be their, active part in shaping society. That was the Nazi Party, to which Hitler walked into a meeting one time and liked what he heard there and liked what he saw there. And through his own leadership skills and force of will, he came to dominate it. So other things, the swastika emblem came from the Thule Society. Hitler was very intensely influenced by a playwright and poet named Dietrich Eckart, not a name well known internationally, but a famous person in Germany as a writer at that time. He was a member of the Thule Society. 3 members of the Thule Society stood trial at Nuremberg for war crimes and crimes against humanity. One of them, Rudolf Hess, the deputy Führer, got life imprisonment at Spandau prison in Berlin. The other 2, Alfred Rosenberg, the Nazi philosopher, and Hans Frank, the governor general of occupied Poland, got the death penalty. And there were other lower ranking Thule Society people who had various positions in the Third Reich. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, the architect of some of the most terrible things the Nazis did, was not actually a member of Thule, but he was part of a paramilitary group that Thule had organized in 1919 during a time of civil war in Germany. So he was kind of loosely connected with Thule, but Thule was part of a bigger network of kind of like-minded organizations that had similar theories, and Himmler was very much part of some of those groups.
What
So
was Werner von Braun one of these figures that also had a connection to the Thule Society?
That's very, very disputable. He may have been involved in a group in Berlin that sort of, if I'm trying to remember this correctly, they had an interest in interplanetary travel in science fiction, in some occult practices. I don't know if that's ever been verified. I did not get into Werner von Braun in the book because I couldn't find really anything I could nail down about him.
He's an interesting figure. From what I know he helped develop our space program as well too. But that whole Nuremberg thing, I mean, that's a very, I wouldn't say controversial, but I mean, there's a lot of parts to it where people have disputes about certain details and characteristics on it. But Werner von Braun was one of those figures that used to hang the 5 slowest Jews at his rocket facility, which is crazy to have that guy involved in our space program.
Well, the Soviets and the Americans both grabbed as many of the German rocket scientists and atomic scientists as possible to make use of their knowledge. And a lot of war criminals ended up working on both sides because they had specialized knowledge. Some of these people, like Joseph Mengele, the infamous doctor at Auschwitz, he probably had some American assistance at some point in escaping Europe because they wanted to know what did he know, what kind of useful information do these people have. Probably a lot of the Soviet atomic program and eventually their space program was based on, in part, on captured German scientists and making use of their expertise. So you can look at this and think about the moral quandary. Do we take really bad people who have some useful knowledge and put them to work for us, or do we put them on trial, get rid of them, and start from scratch? I mean,
Yeah.
that was what the thinking on both sides of the Cold War came down to, and the decision was, in many cases, yeah, let's hire these guys. Try to clean up their image. In the case of Werner von Braun, he was like the hero of the NASA space program, the moon landing, all this stuff. And oh yeah, that's right, he was involved in the V2 rocket attacks against Britain, but that was a long time ago. That was during the war. So
It's still crazy. I mean, I get it from like a strategic standpoint where you're like, well, they already did the research. We can't take back what they did. We might as well use it. But that's like a big moral, ethical dilemma. I would not want to be the one making that decision, though. But do you think that it's some of that ritualistic stuff, like, the surrounding members in robes and chanting to gods of Old Norse, those have to do something to you subconsciously or psychologically that have you on this quest for knowledge and information and seeking wisdom and all of this stuff that could be really, really far out there. Like, it doesn't have to get into the land of conspiracy. It's just like, there's no way it doesn't. If you spend your whole life going to a 9 to 5 job and just boring, bland, don't do anything, you're probably not going to have any, or you might have some repression where you want to go out and explore, vacation. But also, if you're around a bunch of kooky crystals and magic and all this type of stuff, and you think that it's actually doing something, that'll have you going down like a really weird path.
yes, it can certainly take you down a weird path. It can also, as opposed to somebody who has a 9 to 5 job and does their job, goes home, puts on the TV, falls asleep at night, or whatever the equivalent in 1920s, 1930s Europe or America would have been. A person like that is probably not venturing out mentally into unexplored realms of thought. I mean, if you want to look for a good side in this, is that probably involvement in some of these kinds of activities would break the normal kind of barriers that we live within, kind of opening the curtain a little bit to look beyond to see what is there. So it very well may be that occult practices stimulated the imagination of Werner von Braun or other people, but it took them down a very dark path, though. And so
I'm not rationalizing the Nazis. I'm just trying to find a more, because there's always stuff that gets linked in with like secret cults and stuff like that go into like really like QAnon type crap I don't really go
right,
for. But
good. I don't want to go there either, but
trying to find a basis in what you can prove through documentation and things of that sort, which is like that type of stuff leads down a bad road, whether you're reading Aleister Crowley's book and you're thinking you can summon dark magic, whether you're doing it for fun. And I've talked to plenty of people who have studied, there's two sides of Freemasonry. There's like the more, I'm going to go get a beer with my friends type deal. Then there's like the kooky stuff where it's like, we're going to learn about spells. It's not anything scary. It's just a bunch of people, whether you want to say cosplaying or releasing stress, whatever. But I mean, that just kind of forms your life in a sense as well, too. If you just think that dark magic, and there's plenty of people that study Satanism and all that type of stuff, it's whatever. But they're different in the aspect of like sometimes they think doing a ritual like is going to bring them good wealth. And I think there's even a more modern day example with people that pray to a crystal for like Reiki energy healing type deals. So it's not super far off from the base, but there is like a manifestation of certain ideas and perspectives that you start to develop experience wise when you're around all this ritualistic fraternity type stuff, which is I think why people get into like really deep down the conspiracy rabbit hole, because like Bohemian Grove is real, and that wasn't, I mean, I don't know if you consider that real, but we have a Nixon tape where Nixon even talks about Bohemian Grove.
Oh yeah, Bohemian Grove is real, and it's another one of these networking centers. Lots and lots of very important people have belonged to it, politicians, people in academia and the news media. Walter Cronkite was a
I know,
member.
that's scary, that's so scary.
Yeah, well, Herbert Hoover, I think, was a member. And, you know, again, I have a chapter on the Bohemian Club in my book, Secret Societies in American History. And yeah, there is a kind of a ritualistic aspect. They get together in the woods in the summertime and have some kind of a little ceremony. I mean, it basically is sort of like a Masonic lodge that very important people belong to. And do the very important people talk to each other and share their ideas? And one might say, "Oh, I've got this great idea for investing in, oil or solar energy or whatever it is. I'm starting a company to do this, and by the way, there could be some legislation that would enable my company to take tax advantages." I mean, I have no doubt that this is one of the major outcomes of the Bohemian Grove and Bohemian Club, and again, other kinds of groups like that. That is not the same thing as saying that somehow the Bohemian Club, again, the 12 men in the room around a table, that they're sort of like, oh, well, let's tell Putin to invade Ukraine because that'll trigger a rise and get. I mean, cue the sinister laughter. It's not like that, but there are actual outcomes that result from these kinds of discussions. And so, I mean, try to look at this in terms of everyday life. I went to a particular university. If somebody I went to school with calls me and says, "Dave, I'm launching, a business doing this, or I'm in a theater performance playing this," I'll take the call and yeah, I'll arrange for some publicity here at the website and magazine that I do to help this buddy from college. So it's kind of like that at a much level because I don't have friends who own gigantic corporations or are members of Congress. But if I were on that level, and one of them called me, if what they asked me to do did not violate my moral principles, I would probably tend to say, yeah, sure, I'll do you a favor. That's, I think, what happens here with these groups. I mean, Skull and Bones is really interesting because, again, an incredible number of people from both political parties who became very important belong to Skull and Bones. And
Apparently, George Bush's grandfather stole Geronimo's head. That's a article that was on the New York. I don't know if that's real or not, but I don't know what. That's the thing about secret societies is people don't like secrets, so they want to know what's in it. But then if you're trying so hard to keep it secret and you deny its existence, it just makes you look even more suspicious. Like I don't feel any more comfortable thinking about people at Bohemian Grove talking about solar energy in front of a giant owl statue. Like that's just whether you're talking about solar problems, you're talking about the latest sports game, to me, that's just a little bit like I'm freaked out. I probably will not be venturing into your woods, whether there's a trail of breadcrumbs or not.
well, I have no interest in belonging to any of these groups either. But I think that whether they operate under a veil of secrecy or some veneer of ritualism or not, I mean, groups of people, talk to each other and swap ideas and ask each other for favors. And I think that's kind of part of the way the world works. And the problem is if you have very well connected people who gather together in secrecy and make deals with each other that have an impact on our society, that impact you and I,
Do
for
you
better
feel
or for worse.
yeah, do you feel
This is
comfortable with
something
that
we need
though?
to kind of, I don't know, keep an eye on, keep
Yeah.
in check, be aware of. Uh,
I like that thinking. That's good thinking because I'm sitting here like, I mean, I would want to be aware of like what's going on in it, obviously. But I mean, if they're making real, actual decisions that affect change in society, like anything, even if it's small scale stuff, whether it's a new pipeline or if it's anything small like that, doesn't have to be so far and extreme. That's still like, I'd rather them. I mean, I don't know. Shame on me for wanting them to be in a boardroom doing that, I guess. I just think more professional aspect, not party style thing, even if it's just sipping around and having a good chat. I'm like, hopefully they take a break from their day jobs.
yeah, I think they probably do. They probably have a great deal of fun at Bohemian Grove in the summertime. But at the same time, yeah, they're important people who are talking to each other and coming up with things. I can't remember right now in my Bohemian Grove chapter from the book something to do with the development of the Manhattan Project. I think came out of that. Like somebody knew somebody who knew somebody else, and some part of the team involved with the Manhattan Project, I think, came out of a Bohemian Club meeting. So,
They invented the iPad there. Now,
yeah, yeah.
but that's crazy to me. I mean, that's a historical. That's huge. Manhattan Project stuff. I mean, that's a big history focal point right there. And if that links into there too, that's just like I wonder how they get in the set and setting. I mean, I hate to copy Timothy Leary with the idea of set and setting, but good God, how did you get yourself prepped to go, we're going to talk about economic business decisions, and then you get there. I mean, how do you even stay focused?
Oh, well, maybe a little bit of alcohol helps. I don't know exactly. Never having been invited to join their conclaves. But again, trying to write about these things in a responsible way, a historically responsible way. I just have to look at the best possible sources, the things that seem valid. If several valid sources say the same kind of thing, I will take it then that there's a strong probability that this happened as a result of this meeting or whatever. And so much of this we will never really know for sure. But at the same time, we don't really know what goes on in closed door meetings of Senate and House committees. We don't really know what discussions go on in the White House, regardless of who is president. We don't know exactly what the board of BP, when they have a meeting, or some other large corporation, what the discussions are. We can kind of feel the results of these things as they impact our lives. But there's all how do you achieve a level of transparency that enables everything to work maximally for the benefit of the greatest number of us? I mean, it's a profound social question that what's the easy answer to that? I mean, some things obviously have to be talked about privately because before you get to the point of making them public, because um, can you imagine like determining for major foreign policy, objective, like what to do about shooting down the Chinese balloon? Okay, if you just open that up to an internet discussion, what would that turn into? I mean, you have like a babble of millions of voices. Shoot it down. No, don't shoot it down. Shoot it down over the Pacific. No, no, wait till it gets to the Great Lakes or whatever it would be. I mean, I think that's a good recent example that there has to be discussion, hopefully by reasonable and well-informed people, assessing, what would be the best decision to make. And doing this in public, I think, is not going to improve the outcome of that. It would just be a babble of voices with people talking who have no knowledge or really reason to have an informed opinion, saying shoot it down here, don't shoot it down there. Um, you know what I'm saying? That I think that there's a need for some degree of privacy in making decisions, but there is too much secrecy. We see this kind of thing with the classified documents scandal going on right now, that many of these classified documents that former presidents, vice presidents, and other people, happen to have with them are probably documents that should never have been classified in the first place. Unimportant stuff. How many trucks are we sending to Afghanistan to aid the war effort there or whatever? Stamp it classified. We don't know. We can know how many. We have 10,000. I mean, some of this stuff is ridiculous and overreach and almost a force of habit on the part of some people in our government, particularly starting with World War II and going on after that, that everything has to be a secret.
Well, they got to stop
And
lying. They got to stop. I've been past year very interested in the Kennedy assassination. I've spoken to many members of the ARRB, even Blakey from the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Um, a lot of the stuff that's in the history book on the Warren Commission, they said that, which just, I mean, first time in 60 years, I got Blakey to admit Oswald was intelligence. And I don't even care who did it. I'm over that. It's been 60 years. You've lost it, but there's no reason that there should still be classified documents, and everybody is on board with that right now. The issue is like things like the church committee, for instance. When I talk about a deep state, I don't talk about Bohemian Grove stuff. What I talk about is the intelligence community is, to me, the deep state. It's the military industrial complex. It's something that we have no idea what they're doing. And the church committee is the best example of that. I mean, the CIA activation on campus, they consider that national security. The public does not need to know about that. A heart attack gun that you can look up on YouTube, a live court proceeding where William Colby's sitting there and they show a heart attack gun. Ways to assassinate Castro. This is stuff that people would hear it and they go conspiracy and roll their eyes. I'm like, look, there are real things out there and that should not get labeled conspiracy. But this idea of secrecy, I mean, Hoover designed it when he was reaching out to Congress about what they can classify as national security. And they found wording to be able to make it fit into national security issues. And this comes straight from the ARRB. Judge Thunheim, he was mentioning certain things of why they keep documents classified. If somebody's still alive in the Kennedy assassination, nobody really is. And then it's just if they're using a method that they used back then still today. And I don't know what that could be, whether it's wiretaps, whatever it is. It doesn't always need to be some grand, and it angers me when people always jump to that conclusion, because there's real things. MK Ultra is real. How far does it go? Well, we don't have documentation because they destroyed it, but it's this idea of secrecy that is like the scariest thing because nobody can handle it. Whether you're in it, you always end up telling somebody, or whether you're outside of it, you just want to know what's going on in there.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, I'll give you an example. I wrote a biography of the filmmaker and theater director Ruben Mamoulian, and I decided to file a Freedom of Information Act request on him. And a couple months came by. I mean, the first response was what? Well, we don't, something to the effect of, we don't believe there is a file on your subject, but if there would be a file on your subject, you would have to go here. So around. And anyway, I get this package in the mail a few months later of a good number of pages, most of it heavily redacted, black magic marker lines through entire paragraphs. And basically, so Ruben Mamoulian, well, there are some things in there that are absolutely fascinating. They saw his car parked 2 blocks away from the Soviet consulate in Los Angeles. And they were taking down license plate numbers of people who were parked near the Soviet consulate. So he may have been going shopping at the drugstore there or something nearby. But so they had him down for that. They had spies in his circle. One of them was, and they called them confidential informants. Confidential informant, then they black out the name of the person. Overheard a conversation among communists about Mamoulian saying, Mamoulian is not one of us. He's a New Deal Democrat. Okay, so they took note of that. They took note of house guests at his parents' party. At his parents' house one night, there was a party there. They took down a list of names of all the people. This was the extent to which the FBI in the 1940s had penetrated, the lives of many people who were doing nothing illegal, nothing questionable even. but the level of suspicion that existed at the top of the FBI, and certainly Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover was not the only person of that mindset, became very pervasive. And because they were able to operate in almost complete secrecy, they were able to, amass this, massive amount of data on, people who were doing nothing that would be, uh, treasonous, subversive, by any normal definition. So yeah, yeah. And in America, I mean, this kind of government secrecy goes back at least to the 1930s, with I think J. Edgar Hoover being a real turning point on the road toward that.
Do you think he was a part of any of these secret society type things?
That's a great question. I didn't come across his name anywhere. So
I've seen plenty of documents with J. Edgar Hoover. I mean, using musicians, using writers, using so much for Cold War espionage, whether it's just tactics of even the CIA or FBI influencing a book and having it pushed out as propaganda to try and stop some type of communist threat that Hoover was labeling a communist threat. I mean, there's so much of it that's kind of, I mean, I don't know how to feel. I don't know the guy, so I couldn't tell you how personally if he was a good guy or not. I can just tell you through documentation that I've seen that. I mean, what was labeled communism? Everything was. Well, you didn't agree with certain statutes or certain ideas the way the government was going, and that's where you look on the boiling down to the secrecy aspect of things. I mean, where do they get their information from? It seems like to me Hoover was, very private, except when he was talking to his FBI. I mean, they had such a great relationship together. I don't ever see him as the type that would go to one of these, secret society things, but I also don't know. I mean, there's rumors about him and Clyde Tolson, and I can't verify those at all, but I can tell you I've seen the picture and I have Clyde Tolson's employee report and his performance review. Out of all the 50 something years Hoover was in charge, he was the only one to get an excellent, perfect score on it. And look, and this is where I said, I can't verify this, but when you look at the document and it says very attentive to my needs, if you think he is whatever he is, you can just run with that. But like I said, that's not really evidence. And I have talked to like LGBTQ historians who have talked about Hoover and his relationship with Clyde Tolson more in depth. So, I mean, I just put a little bit more weight into that. But there's like a lot of things that throughout our government that you see things pop up that seem really suspicious and really crazy. And I think sometimes there's a rational excuse, but there's also like, I mean, Alan Dulles killed Patrice Lumumba. That was an assassination thing. I mean, he's now getting charged with Dag Hammarskjöld's death while he was flying into, was it Cuba or Africa? He was over there. His plane went down. I mean, that was a suspicious investigation. Well, the UN, I recently just had my buddy Greg. They recently sent him a letter back. Greg Polgrain, he made a book called Alan Dulles in Indonesia. He's focused heavily on Dag Hammarskjöld in his life. They sent him a letter saying that they're now going to be investigating into that based on the evidence of Patrice Lumumba. And it's been such a huge gap in time where it's like, what's the point? I guess get closure.
it's a cold case, but it would be, I think, very, very revealing and instructive to finally document, if it's possible, the extent to which the U.S. was doing these kinds of bad deeds. In the context, of course, that the Soviets were doing similar things too. I mean, it was a
Everybody
Cold
was.
War with bullets. It wasn't entirely cold. There were deaths resulting. Vietnam, I mean, was basically a kind of proxy war of the Cold War, and assassinations and attempts to defame people. I mean, both sides were doing this, which is not, a way of morally justifying it, but just to understand that both sides thought that they were, fighting for their ideal of, society, of the way they wanted the world to be.
It's everybody had a gun to each other's head, basically. It's wait until the pen drops. But do you think that, I mean, there's probably multifactorial influences into that type of thinking or that type of, position where you end up leading into wiretapping Americans and doing so much, the FBI's scenario, for instance. But do you think that starts with certain things like going to secret meetings and doing things of that sort? It doesn't have to be super far conspiratorial, but you're already thinking, I mean, if me and you join a secret club and nobody's allowed in, we're already thinking, hey, we got this. We're already getting ourselves a little bit higher up than other people. And I think with that kind of dehumanization is what we do with war. It's what we do with labeling people communists. Doesn't mean they're not humans. But there's so much of that, and I think that starts with that type of secret meeting and training and types of that sort, whether despite whatever they talk about, but it is that problems issues of the '60s and '70s, the counterculture movement, the creating a fake magazine and loading it up on a college campus called the Radical Observer. That's just stopping protesters of the Vietnam War. You're no longer thinking about a government that works for the people. You're talking about a government that sees you as a nuisance in a sense. And it doesn't have to, like I said, be conspiratorial. That's factually documented. But that is a bad road. That is a really dark road. I think Hale Boggs, 71 is a video you can watch of him calling out J. Edgar Hoover and his FBI. And the reporter literally goes, "What's your like information on that?" And he goes, "It'll all come to light. You'll see. But Hoover needs to retire. He's wiretapping congressmen." And they go, "Well, what's the problem? Why is it taking so long?" And you can watch his video. It's on YouTube. He says, "You're asking the FBI to investigate the FBI." Now, set at 71, and then he's pulled aside and talked by Earl Warren. But then in 72, his plane goes down. So look, I'm not saying that that's the cause of it, but I'm like, damn, if I don't put more weight into that one, just because Hoover was not, short or shy of considering you a domestic terrorist in any aspect of the words. There's a lot of people that were demonized and locked up and also either deported or of some sort.
Well, one of the things to think about too, and I actually first heard this as a 5 or 6 year old at the dinner table as my relatives were talking about this very same thing, the idea that J. Edgar Hoover probably has a file on every US president. How else to explain the fact that he held his office for as long as he did? I mean, he started to come to prominence under Woodrow Wilson in World War One, and he lasted into Richard Nixon. Uh, it's almost impossible to imagine any sort of normal person with normal abilities and skill sets having that job under so many presidents for that length of time if he didn't have some way of exerting influence over every president, every potential president. And so, yeah,
How did he not acknowledge the mob, though? That's the crazy thing. I'm
because
just
he
like,
couldn't defeat them.
I,
Yeah, I've
oh,
got a good theory about that. He couldn't beat them. He loved taking down John Dillinger and Bonnie and Clyde and, these kinds of amateur, criminals running amok. But he couldn't defeat the mob. I don't think that he was part of the mafia. I don't think he was on the take from them. I think that he sized them up and he didn't think that he could defeat them. And finally, when it became so evident that there was a mafia, he came up with this La Cosa Nostra. Cosa Nostra is a sort of a Sicilian argot for, means, I think, our thing. And the wiretaps would pick up mobsters speaking to each other in Italian or in the Sicilian dialect. Cosa Nostra, so almost kind of like a, sometimes I think a code word for take care of this guy. We use Cosa Nostra. So anyway, so Hoover comes up with this thing. Oh, all of a sudden I've discovered a very dangerous crime syndicate called La Cosa Nostra, as if this was not the mafia, it was some new thing that came into this country somehow. And of course, then you could use the kind of a vague anti-immigrant thing too. Oh, it's coming in from Italy. So that was
that's a
Hoover's way
better
of
theory than
dealing with
I've ever heard. I'll let you know that. I've heard some crazy, like, I think even one of the mob guys talked about, we had pictures of him in a dress. I had the photos. I don't still use that as evidence, though.
Yeah.
I thought
Well,
I've
I
looked
don't
into his
know how.
dealings at the track. Like, he used to bet at the track a lot, too. And the mobs, they said fixed races for him. And I think that's even more widely known as less conspiratorial than it is with the dress one, at least.
Mhm. Well, I mean that is certainly possible. It's possible that J. Edgar Hoover, who had something on everybody, that somebody else had something on him. Photographs of him in a dress. I mean, I think that would be really hard. Would have been hard to do in those days. But J. Edgar Hoover at the racetracks, losing on horses or whatever. I mean, yeah, they could maybe have turned that against him. So, yes, it's very interesting. And back to Kennedy, there was a book that came out 8, 9, 10 years ago by a guy named Nick Nero, a Chicago writer who had his own very elaborate version of the Kennedy assassination, which he tied into a whole bunch of different things that happened, including Watergate, that he kind of
That's
like found.
that's Daniel P. Sheehan's theory. Nick must have Daniel's had this theory forever, but it's about the Watergate burglars and how they're linked to the Kennedy assassination, but also the fear of
Cuba and the Mafia
the
and
fear what was on the Nixon tape that was missed. Look, I've had Jeff Shepard who was defending Nixon. He was Nixon's defending lawyer, one of the many during Watergate, and I asked him about that. He ignored me 3 times. I asked the question 3 times what was on that missing tape. And he just looked at me and then glossed right over it. So whether he wants to entertain, I mean, it has that one's probably more structured than most of the stuff. I mean, that the Kennedy assassination is a big one for me, and everyone's too busy trying to figure out the who and the why. I'm just like, can't we just get the historical accuracy on the day a little bit when it comes to documents? Like, there should be no, but it's the classified thing. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Hoover was a part of some type of thing, whether he was a Boy Scout or not. Nixon didn't play any games, which is surprising. I mean, Nixon was straight. I don't do any of that. He has a perfect statement about Bohemian Grove and all that secret society stuff. And it's just like, you would think that guy, he gets blacklisted so bad throughout history where it's like, you were trying to control everybody and you weren't a part of that. Like that's how you meet people. I want to know if Lyndon Johnson was a part of it. That's the main question.
no, I don't think Lyndon Johnson was part of Bohemian Grove. Yeah, the thing is that Nixon harbored a resentment against what he considered to be elite groups. That was part of his emotional motivation. He felt excluded. He was not part of. He didn't graduate from Yale. He wasn't a Skull and Bone. He wasn't invited to Bohemian Grove. Um, so he had a resentment against people who were part of these things, and that if you want to look for emotional explanations of Nixon's career, that plays into it.
Do you think that this is my own little theory, but do you think that because he mentioned statements like that, where he made statements about Bohemian Grove and all that, I mean, there's a little bit of evidence to support that they did blacklist or they did target Nixon. I mean, I'm not saying he should have stayed at all. He was definitely pushing his power, very much so. But I mean, there's Jeff Shepard showed this when he was on air, but there's transactions and letters back and forth between the prosecuting team and the judge where they were meeting and having dinners without during when this court thing's going on. You don't do that with your judge, especially if you're on you're a federal judge. You don't do that's like a bribe. So I mean, whether that is one of the reasons, I just consider that I'd add that onto the list of things that were wrong with Nixon. I mean, a lot of I'm pretty sure if you talked about Bohemian Grove and you were a politician, you probably they want you in their group. That's the whole thing, is like a fraternity.
Yeah, well, I think that there was an organized effort on the part of elite groups in America who disliked Nixon. Did they have good reason to dislike Nixon? Possibly. On the other hand, I have made the argument that Nixon was actually better than a good many presidents that we've had in terms of what he did that had a positive result. I mean, Environmental Protection Agency on the one. On the other hand, the war on drugs, which is a disaster, that was a Nixon idea. So he had a mixed
I think he
record.
could have been good. But I think he didn't understand kind of the agencies a little bit. I think he thought since I'm the president, they got to work for me, and that's not how they really work. Like that, and I think that's a big slip up. But also, if he would have been president if he would have beat Kennedy, he would have probably we wouldn't have all this history on Nixon about these scandals and situations like this. He seemed like a president that was fit for a little bit earlier. And I think he came in a little bit more towards the counterculture, Vietnam War type stuff with Lyndon Johnson and all that type of stuff. I think that's what really wrong time and place, I would say.
Yeah, Nixon looked very square, to use the language of that time. By the time he was elected president, he did not look like he was in tune with the trend of culture in America and around the world. He was not a charismatic figure. He was a terrible speech maker. I mean, he looked like Ed Sullivan. I mean, he was just very awkward, uncomfortable in his own body as he would be delivering a speech. Um, there was an aura of anxiety and paranoia about him. He kind of reminds me of the Humphrey Bogart character, Captain Queeg from the Caine Mutiny movie. And I think that maybe, again, that he was damaged in some way psychologically by his defeat at the hands of Kennedy. And I am not a believer, by the way, in conspiracy theories about rigged elections in recent times, but I do think there's evidence to suggest that the 1960 election may have been rigged in certain places, just enough to give Kennedy the electoral college votes that he needed to defeat Nixon.
The
And
mob, it could be the mob. I mean, there's even Alan Dulles, the leader of the CIA, the director who Kennedy fired, and then when Kennedy dies, they had him investigating the president's death, which is like, why? But that guy was in charge of the Bay of Pigs fiasco that happened, and Kennedy took the rap for it. But Alan Dulles wrote Kennedy's speeches during those debates, which is insane because Dulles is a Republican and Nixon's a Republican and JFK is a Democrat. So I was like, why is this guy? Because I think he knew he couldn't push over Nixon. Nixon was not about like, you can't push me over, you're going to do what I say type deal when it came to the agencies. And Kennedy was new guy on the block. And they figured, I mean, when Kennedy first got established, he hired Nixon, well, not Nixon. He hired, not hired, he kept in charge as his personal confidants or like number ones kind of Allen Dulles and J. Edgar Hoover. Later, not even less than a year, he's firing Dulles, and then he wants Hoover to retire. So what did he look at it as? Let me get the guys who've been in charge of the CIA or the OSS and the FBI for a long time. You get them on board, you get the agencies on board. And that was his thinking. And eventually, after so many problems, they kind of butted heads and he tried to get rid of them. But like that whole thing is like Mafia rigged election. I mean, it's possible. I mean, Robert Kennedy went right after the mob, and that's one of the theories of like who killed, Kennedy. I mean, there's a lot of connections to the mob, which is just nuts to me because every time you watch a movie, whether it's government influenced or not, the FBI comes on screen, they're badasses. And then you got the mob as the enemies and the vigilantes. And it's like, wait a minute, you guys are working together. Like I saw the CIA trying to assassinate Castro. You guys lied to me. And that's like a big thing where it comes into like not only secrecy, but people getting shattered and really going off the end with conspiracy stuff. Because when stuff like that comes out, I mean, I get the dangers in national security, but the dangers to the public's consciousness when they've been lied to is twice as bad.
the biggest step toward the descent into conspiratorial thinking that we now live within was, of course, the Warren Commission, which I don't think that very many Americans at the time believed it. I know, again, my parents did not believe the Warren Commission. I remember, all the adults around me, not at the time, not believing in it. And I think it set the precedent for a kind of distrust of the machinations at the highest level. So if you think that something as significant as the assassination of an American president could be covered up, could be lied about, what else is going on? And I think the answer is that a lot of other things are going on, have gone on. And yet at the same time, I think we need to try to maintain, for the sake of our own mental health, perhaps, the ability to carefully weigh and assess the ideas that are flying around, whirling around us out there right now. Because what is the road that takes us from not believing in the Warren Commission to QAnon? It's a steep descent, but for many people, I think that they made that descent and they were unable after a point to distinguish pure fantasy from probability.
Do you think the Warren
And
Commission was right?
do I think no? I think the Warren Commission was a cover-up.
I'm about to say because the HSCA proved all that was like some of their stuff was garbage. I was like, the history books don't even talk about the HSCA. I was like, damn, you guys. I even told Blakey, I was like, I'm so sorry, you guys don't get enough credit for it. But Blakey thinks the CIA, ripped them off on documents, and they did. I've read plenty of documents. I mean, they could just label anything national security, and Blakey would request for it, and they were like, no, we're not giving it to you. It's like, hang on a second, this is an investigation into basically checking over the Warren Commission, but actually kind of looking, and they did prove probable conspiracy. But that's the thing, is like the people that did it necessarily don't need to be the people that covered it up. And that's a real thing, is that there was a cover up in place. It's not a conspiracy. It's based by fact. They move a back wound up 6 inches to the diagram shows him getting hit directly in the back of the neck. And there was no frontal shot. There was a hole that went in about the tip of the finger on the thing. And that's from every person that did the autopsy on him. So it's like, there's not lying, but it makes a lot more sense when you say this. it had to be Oswald, and whether he was there or not, whether there was others involved, it had to be one lone guy, because you cannot go to war with Cuba and you cannot go to war with Russia, which is people are going to be expecting that, or you're going after the mob. And as entrenched as they were, so it's not like super like hard to get there. It's just about it. We have to wrap this up quick. And that was their whole purpose. We got to wrap this up as fast as possible. It did take them a little bit of time, but that's not what you want in an investigation, right? You want someone to get the right answers. So there was a lot of mistakes. I'm sorry I had to do that, because that's been a topic for me for like the past year, trying to get people to stop rolling their eyes at. I'm just gonna choke somebody. Like, it's like, hang on, we got to talk about the seriousness of this.
No, I think it was very serious, and I think that the fact of the cover up again had a very bad impact on the consciousness of the American public at the time and ever since then. So, you establish the almost inevitable conclusion of a cover up of the most important event of that moment in time, the assassination of Kennedy, and this then leads to what is real, what are we being lied about. Yeah, it leads and if you are not, I guess this is the thing, that in a democracy, I think there's an obligation for people to try to be well informed, to try to understand the issues that affect us, and to do that requires some work, some discernment, some ability to distinguish reality from fantasy. And I think that there are millions of people, sadly, who don't have that ability, or they don't want to work toward gaining that ability. And as a result of that, we have odd phenomenon like QAnon at one extreme. And on the other, to the other far extreme is would be gullibility, that you believe everything the government tells you. On the other hand, you believe nothing, that the government is controlled by the 12 evil men in a room someplace. So truth lies somewhere in the middle there. And we need to work at trying to find the truth, realizing that the truth with the capital T is a huge thing. We're never going to be able to wrap our hands around everything, but we need to be able to decide what is likely, at least. And if we don't have that ability, then the democratic system begins to get off the rails when we
We need
have demagogues.
we need to
And
have the conversation for sure. Like the critical thinking getting lumped in with conspiracy theory. Like if I go through, I mean, Tucker Carlson said this, and it's probably the last thing I'll mention about the Kennedy assassination. I had been saying it for months about Jack Ruby, and the one psychiatrist that visited him that injected him with a flu shot was Louise Joyon West. Tucker Carlson said that, and I've been saying it for months. And I went into his autopsy reports, I went into his psychiatric records, and I see his name stamped there. Joyon West is very popular when it comes to certain figures that have gone a little bit unstable in history, Manson as being one of them. But that's MK Ultra, but we don't have documents on that. So it's like I don't know how to prove that, but I can dive through and see everything, transaction records. I can go through all that and I can prove that to you. That'll get labeled a conspiracy because it's just so far for people to believe. And I think like with a bunch of things, you don't know what. And I'm not going to say like, all conspiracies I don't validate them, but you need to have the conversation about things. Epstein is a big example of that. That is insane. And look, a heart attack gun is a good example of that. I called that a conspiracy until I watched the video and I was like, oh my God, I've been lying to myself. No, but that was like something it sounds so far-fetched even for me to even get there, where I listen to some of the conspiracy stuff and then I try and find a document to back it up. I think there's rational explanations, like why was no Secret Service member fired after Kennedy was killed? They said not to embarrass their family members. Okay, well, that's a really crappy excuse, but it is an excuse, and they should still lose their jobs. Sad to say it, they were out drinking the night before, and you don't do that. So there's real things and weird, odd things that people can really open up and try and find a rope that's not there. But then there's things that weren't ethically done right under the procedures, such as Judge Thunheim asking for prior death threats of Kennedy. And then 2 weeks after requesting for those, part of the ARRB, the Secret Service destroyed those, much like Trump and the Secret Service destroying documents again. Like we can't let those are unethical things. You can't let those just happen. but we just seem to just gloss over it and move on to the next problem. And that's issues with our democracy. It does not need to be a political side. It just needs to be better, I guess, standards or rules and measures set in place forth when a decision like this or an error does pop up.
Well, yes, because both parties are guilty of things. Yeah, there are so many widespread problems that need to be addressed, and the classified document situation of recent months is a good example of this. The standard practices do not seem to be followed. Uh, Too many things are being classified. There are too many secrets out there, and the sense that people have that so many things are being conducted in secrecy breeds conspiracy theories then, and attempts to explain the changes taking place in the world right now. I mean, the rapid pace of change in our society is remarkable. It makes many people uncomfortable. It creates anxiety, and people are trying to find scapegoats, easy explanations. Again, there's some group of people or some again, the 12 men in the room somewhere that might be behind all of this, when in reality there are things wrong with the entire systems that we live under. And if we are a democracy, we theoretically at least have the ability to make positive changes in the systems we live under. And there are many people who probably want to thwart that system, that ability that we have to do that, to minimize the input of people. But we as people, we as citizens of a society like the United States, need to be able to think critically. We need to take the time to inform ourselves. It's not possible to be informed about every issue taking place in the world, but we need to identify what is most important to us at this point in time and delve into it, because the lazy kind of an occasional headline on your cell phone and that's your knowledge of the news is not adequate in the world we live in.
I agree 100%, Dave. And me and you got to get into Bohemian Grove and affect some real change. I'll tell you that. We got to just go in there with some Arnold Palmers or something and tell them what's up. Like, hey, this is what we got to do. But I appreciate the time you gave me to talk on my show. I really, really do appreciate this conversation with you. I enjoyed it very much. Is there a place where people can find your links, whether it's your website, social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, any of those?
Yes, I have a website, davidluhrssen.com. If you Google Shepherd Express, you'll find a lot of recent articles by me. Those are the best ways to find me.
And I'm going to link all those in the description. And like I said, it was a pleasure having you on the show. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank Podcast.